Welcome to the MasterMINED Club, your ultimate gateway into the world of Bitcoin mining. Whether you're just starting out or looking to scale your operations, our vibrant community of like-minded enthusiasts is here to support you every step of the way. Join us for weekly sessions led by industry pros, where you'll exchange ideas, brainstorm strategies, and stay motivated on your mining journey. From heat management to site optimization, our monthly deep dives cover the technical know-how you need to succeed. And with access to our entire back catalog, you'll never miss a beat. But that's not all. Our members enjoy exclusive one-on-one sessions with veteran miners, plus direct access to special pre-sales and insider opportunities at Bitcoin Mining World. Ready to take your mining to the next level? Join the MasterMINED Club today and secure your spot in the future of Bitcoin mining. Visit bitcoinminingworld.com or scan the QR code now. And now back to the show.
Yo, what is up, Bitcoin miners? Happy Friday. I hope everyone's doing well today. I hope you guys are enjoying the new crypto regime, the Bitcoin regime that we're now finally fully under. So I'm super excited about that. Did you guys hear about Ross Stevens getting freed? That was pretty cool too. Welcome to the Mastermind Club, guys. I am super happy to have you guys here. Super excited about what we're going to be talking about today. I know that a lot of you are looking at trying to build out an industrial sized Bitcoin mining operation, and that's totally cool. We're here for that. We want to help anyone build any size mining operation that you so choose. I personally am a small miner. I'm a heat punk. I am someone who loves to find creative ways to introduce Bitcoin mining into heat processes. And so when we have conversations like we're having today with Tyler Stevens, the creator of the HeatPunks Manifesto, I get a little tingly inside because I love the implications that heat reuse has on the wider world of Bitcoin mining. We're gonna get into it. We're gonna bring up Tyler. Tyler is the founder of Exergy and the founder of the space in Denver. We've got a couple things to talk about before, but I just want everyone and anybody who's here, if you're watching this live and if you're watching the recording, if you're not part of our mastermind club, I implore you guys to join. It's absolutely free to join, and the things that you get access to are immense. Like, not only are you going to get, weekly sessions where we either do a community call and talk to all of our different members, we brainstorm ideas and solutions together, we do these mastermind deep dives every other week, but we also give you blueprints. We help you every step of the way, whether you're a budding enthusiast trying to get into the world of Bitcoin mining, or you've been Bitcoin mining for a while and you're just looking for ways to scale and grow your mining operations. We all know that Bitcoin mining is a very competitive and extremely difficult industry to get into, especially with every 4 years, our revenues are being cut in half. So there are always creative ways to come up with more money and more revenue, and that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy the idea of heat reuse. But I'm going to show this on the screen right now. If you scan this QR code, it'll take you directly to the sign up link to sign up for our mastermind community. This is a great opportunity for anybody. Like I said, this mastermind community has been pivotal to my education and my growth in the industry. This week, like I said, we're going to be talking to Tyler Stevens. He is a heat punk and a great guy. I really enjoyed talking with Tyler. I consider him a friend. Next week, or not next week, in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking with Joe Lively. And Joe Lively is also a dear friend of mine. And he has built a couple of different mining sites. He's gone from greenfield to operational, and he's going to show you how to look at a site, how to optimize that site, how to procure that site, how to choose the right infrastructure for the site, and how to choose the right business model as well. So it's all going to be packed into one, short, condensed form. You're going to get a lot of information from that. So scan this QR code here on the screen right now to sign up for that mastermind deep dive webinar. And then the last thing I want to talk about before we pass it off to Tyler is Bitcoin mining world. Like, we really enjoy doing things and collaborating with the community. Now, if you guys haven't heard of Mining Mafia is a community on Twitter that talks a lot about the giant pubcos and the different stocks. It's really tailored around the stocks and the trading of the different mining operations, but they have a pretty large community, and we are coming together to do a after party in Fort Lauderdale on March 2025, on March 26th, 2025. This will be during the Mining Disrupt conference. So if you're going to be out in Miami, you can go to https://2.tools/MMM to sign up for that. I'm As far as I understand, it's free. We'll talk to Scott. We'll hear from Scott later, but just come out, say hi, and enjoy some drinks and some good food. It's going to be a good time. But with that, let's bring on Tyler.
Hey
Tyler,
guys,
how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. Excited to chat.
It's cold. It's cold over there where you're at, isn't it?
28.
28. All right.
It's sunny though, so we're blessed out here.
Like a perfect opportunity to talk about some heat reuse. Today was actually the first day I walked into my studio, and it was actually warm in here when I came in, because I've got this Loki rig running, so I am taking advantage of some heat that thing produces. But no, we're excited to have you here today, man. Thank you for coming on and talking to our community. You are the author of a HeatPunks Manifesto. Real quick before we get into everything, can you give us the overview of how this came about?
Essentially, I was an engineer doing heat transfer and thermal analysis, all the while going down the Bitcoiner rabbit hole. Started to eventually learn about mining. Then I was like, wait a second, these things are super power dense electrical devices that just turn electricity into heat. People got to be talking about the heat with these things. And then I found all these plebs building and tinkering and using them in their garage, heating their home, making space heaters, retrofitting, hacking together these industrial miners. And I was like, this seems really interesting. There might be an actual model here, a market, target market. And then the more and more I went down that rabbit hole, is like, oh, it makes sense for this person. It makes sense for this person, but we have this challenge and we need to do that. And then we all got together and we made a Telegram group. Trevor's in it. And it's just been so fun to basically navigate this like emerging sub industry of Bitcoin mining. And now what I believe is a very plausible new appliance and infrastructure category for electric resistive heating, so to speak, that pays you to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking with Schnitzel yesterday, and
Nice.
it's just it doesn't make sense to not have, these applications, these appliances in your home. If you can make money mining Bitcoin and heating something, it doesn't make sense to do it in the old antiquated way. So it's going to take time to build it out, and we need people like yourself out there doing the hard work to make sure that this happens. So I'm really excited about the space. Can you tell the community a little bit about some of the things that you've got going on? You've got a few things going on right now.
Totally. So building off of that, when I was chatting with all these heat punks, like we called them, I think Gerald or John Hashrate Heating might have coined that term, but I think we've all embraced it, which is awesome. The heat punks, just meaning Bitcoin miners. That's my manifesto. Bitcoin miners that notice this potential for electric heating infrastructure that pays you to use it in the large target market. I mean, heat is a huge, huge energy consumption. It's like comfort heat, being warm and having warm water is 25% of all energy used on Earth. And so that led to that manifesto, which led to bringing everyone together in a group chat that's working on this, the HeatPunks Telegram group. DM me or reach out to me or a couple other guys if you want to get added to that group. We're building and stuff like that. It's just great to have a channel for us to solve problems together, to devise solutions and things like that. And then that led to me essentially having calls with everybody in that HeatPunks Telegram group and learning. And I took all these notes over the past year, pretty much all of 2024. And I realized, dang, this is really fascinating. There's a lot of things to learn from the economics. Who's a good target market? How do you navigate hash price? Is it a good fit for me? Can I use it to boil water? Yes or no? Like, what are the limitations? What are my boundaries? All this. And I was like, wait a second, there needs to be a book on this. And no one had written one. And so I essentially just selfishly took all my notes and put it into a book that I hope will help other people learn about the potential for Bitcoin mining heat reuse. And so there is a book coming out that I authored called Bitcoin Mining Heat Reuse. It'll be launching at the end of this month. Stay tuned. There'll be some announcements on social media and Twitter and whatnot in the coming days. And I really hope you guys enjoy that. The ebook will be free. It'll be at conferences and whatnot. And I'm excited to really showcase to the world the potential for this use case. And then lastly, I'll build off that. Then I decided, wait a second, there's so many people building amazing products, tinkering, retrofitting Chinese miners, the industrial miners. They're not really designed for homes or heating infrastructure, even in businesses. There's a whole software challenge thing with the firmware, talking to the devices. They have weird form factors, all these things. And so we're actually hosting at the Space, which is a new Bitcoin hub in Denver, Colorado that I helped co-found with a bunch of other guys. We're hosting our first summit. It's called Undermine. The HeatPunk Summit is kind of the subtitle. And it's not so much a conference to, come and buy products and just connect with other Bitcoiners, but more so about getting the right brains, the right minds in the room to really navigate this emerging industry and say, what do we need from the firmware developers? What do we need from the pool guys to be aware of? What do we need from the guys at the chip level? Because, Scott and the BitX movement have showcased that, it's not really scalable to pull chips off of these S21s and S19s and What's miners and put them into different form factors with the BitX. How do we get them into a water heater shape or something that's more conducive for an HVAC system in your furnace and things like that? We're going to have HVAC engineers, hydronics engineers, plumbers, electricians, general contractors, people from the ASIC side of things, all the way to Bob Burnett, Bitcoin mechanic, people like that, Matt Hill from Start9, who I know you know. And it's going to be a really awesome 2-day summit. at the end of February. You can check that out at our website, denver.space.
Wow, you have a lot of things going on, Tyler. Honestly, I'm honored to have you in as one of the founders and the leaders. Not leaders, we don't have leaders, but the you're leading the charge when it comes to the HeatPunk movement, and it's something that I have found my niche within. I really enjoy this whole process working on these things, and I'm really excited for that book and for the conference. So anybody, I shared the link at the bottom of the screen. So if you guys want to go out to that, you know, space is very limited. It sounds like there's not going to be very much space left, but it is going to be a good time. With that, let's dive into what we're going to be talking about today. Can you give us an overview of what you're going to be presenting on?
Yes. So the title of this, and I see you put it up there, is the HeatPunks Manifesto. And that manifesto is just on my website, tylerstevens.me. I've done a Twitter thread on it too. The nit and gritty, the short story there is it's just a manifesto very much mirroring the Cypherpunks manifesto. I use that inspiration, just arguing that, you know, energy is abundant. It's our right to use energy as we deem fit. You can't stop us. When you say mining is bad, you try to vilify it. Well, what happens if I say it's my heating infrastructure? Then is it bad? That kind of thing. But the presentation today is actually taking this a layer further. And so it's a little bit more technical. I think it hopefully will fit the audience tuning in. But it's really about the basics of thermodynamics and heat transfer for Bitcoin miners and what you should be aware of. So this applies to people that aren't necessarily reusing heat, but I think it's more so important for the people who are managing and reusing heat because it's another product to deal with. And these will be the two technical appendices in my book coming out. And so I'm just going to walk through that from a high level. And I think it's important for everyone to understand whether you're managing 10 megawatts or just, you know, one machine in your attic. And we're going to dive into it.
Absolutely. Well, with that, let's dive in, Tyler. I'm going to bring your presentation up on stage. I'm going to pop out. I'm going to let you do your thing. Just let me know if you need me.
Awesome. All right, let's do it. So this is Bitcoin mining, thermodynamics, and heat transfer. And I want to frame the fundamentals here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is thermodynamics. What is energy? What is thermodynamics for Bitcoiners as it relates to us, right? For Bitcoin miners. So energy is a property of matter. It's not directly observable. There's different forms, right? There's electrical energy, there's mechanical, there's thermal heat energy, there's nuclear energy, sound waves. All these things are different forms of energy. And what it is defined as is the capacity to do work. And work is defined in physics as the ability to exert a force over a distance. So it's literally force times distance. And all these different types of energy, they do boil down to work in some form. Obviously, mechanical work is the easiest to conceptualize, force times distance. So you can see here, there's someone lifting a miner and putting it onto a rack in a warehouse, right? They're lifting it with a force of 100 newtons, and they're lifting it over a distance of 1 meter to get it on that rack. That force times distance, Newton times meters, results in a workforce of 100 Newton meters. So that's the energy required to lift that object. As it relates to electrical work, it's a little bit harder to conceptualize because we can't see it. But electrical work involves moving an electric charge, Q, through an electric field over some distance. So the Q times E equals your force. The charge through the electric field is your force, and then the distance is D. And then I like to visualize it with this slide analogy. It's the best one I've found. And so the electric field is kind of the slope of the slide, and then the Q is the charge moving across it, and then the D is the length of the slide, the distance. And then for thermal work, this is like heat work. So how does a combustion engine work? This is the piston in your car. And so when you have heat, that expansion, that combustion, that explosion of gas, fuel and air mixture, you get an explosion, an increase in pressure. So it's pressure times the change in volume. That piston will move down, and the change in volume is related to the distance, the length that piston travels down the crankshaft. This is something that I think is fun to point out. Bitcoin mining is a proof of work based system, right? I think it's really cool to point it out as it's actually proof of force. So it requires electrical work, literal work, force times distance at the atomic scale over the transistors to perform the logic operations of the SHA-256 hashing algorithm. So hence it's appropriately named to call it proof of work. It's literally work in physics as it relates to physics, which is super fascinating to me. there's a resistance, as I like to put it. When people say Bitcoin is real, it's tangible, it's tied to energy, it's tied to the real world. This is why it is tied to the real world, because you're pushing that rock up that hill, obviously at the atomic scale. And then I know the units are all over the place. It can be a little bit confusing to newcomers. Kilowatt hours, kilowatts, BTU per hour. What is power? Power is just energy over time, which is the force times distance over time. And so it's a rate-based unit. So work is force times distance. That's your Newton times meters, back from that graphic of the mechanical work at the beginning. 1 Newton times 1 meter is what's denoted as the joule. That's that unit of energy, joules. Power is joules per second, and a joule per second is what we call the watt. So that's all that means. So here's an example here. If a Bitcoin miner is drawing 3,000 watts of electric power, it's consuming 3,000 joules of energy every second. And over the hour, that equates to 10.8 million joules, because there's 3,600 seconds in 1 hour. So it's fun to think about it that way, how many joules you're really pulling just for one miner. So yeah, let's just double click on the units a little bit more. So the joule is the base unit of energy. Newton times meter equates to 1 joule. The British thermal unit is commonly used in heating infrastructure and things like that. It is equal to, I have it here, I didn't put it in the slide, but it's the amount of energy required to raise the temperature of 1 pound of water by 1 degree Fahrenheit. So more of an American unit, not so much the metric system, which can be confusing, but the way that it's scaled, that unit is scaled, it's more useful for us in terms of just like we use horsepower instead of saying our car has like 300,000 watts of power. It's just easier to say it's got 100 horsepower, things like that. So it's better unit of measurement for larger applications as it relates to heat. You can see how the joules really build up if you were measuring everything in joules, millions and millions of joules. And the therm is used primarily in natural gas billing. So the people mining off grid will be familiar with this, and in the energy sector. And that's just equal to 100,000 BTU. So a little bit of a larger scale. And then you have the kilowatt hour, which is equal to 1,000 watt hours. And this can be confusing, the units of energy between the kilowatt hour and the units of power. I'm not thrilled with it. I'd rather use joules than kilowatt hours, but it's just a little bit easier, especially with, like, if you think about electric cars, they have big kilowatt hour battery packs. It's a little bit more useful to measure and then extrapolate from there the power you can extract of it on a rate basis over time. So a 100 kilowatt hour battery pack in a Tesla Model S can exert 100 kilowatts for 1 hour. So when we get to the units of power, we have the watt, which is relevant to the joule. It's just joules per second. Then there's the BTUs per hour. That would be your power rate for the heating industry, essentially. There's a misnomer, not a misnomer. It's just something fun the HeatPunks like to say. It's like we're converting watts into BTUs. It's actually we're converting watts into BTUs per hour. We're converting joules of electricity into BTU. It's the same thing. We're just changing the units, and that represents talking about changing from an electrical measurement stick to a more common heat measurement stick for power and energy. The horsepower down there, you guys are familiar with that. We all drive cars. Horsepower, quick off the cuff, it's equal to like 746 watts. So there's 746 watts per horsepower. So a megawatt is like 1,340 something horsepower. It's just fun to put that in reference. I think it's funny to look at like a big, large mega mining site. We've got 10 megawatts and you're like, dang, that's 13,000 horsepower. That's pretty crazy to see that in one building or one system. It's pretty small form factor, right? And then you've got the kilowatt. That's familiar to us with each machine. They're rated in kilowatts now. Modern machines are pushing 3,000, 4,000, all the way up to 8,000 kilowatts. 8,000 watts, which is 8 kilowatts in these modern mining machines. So during the mining process, this electric energy, joules, is continuously converted into thermal heat energy, continuously, because it's a rate base. So we're constantly converting joules to joules, but it's just changing from electric energy into heat energy. And both of the forms of energy, so it's the same unit. We could measure it in BTUs, but this is just the easiest way. I like to keep everything joules, at least from the beginning, so you don't get yourself confused. But on a rate basis, electrical power is converted into thermal power, and they're both watts. You can measure heat in watts. It's just commonly measured in BTU, like I said, for those scales. So it's a little bit more digestible to communicate these numbers in heating systems and whatnot. But they're both watts whenever you're talking about rate. Now let's dive a little bit deeper into temperature versus thermal energy. They are different. So at the atomic scale, temperature is just a measurement of the average velocity, the average kinetic energy of particles in a substance. It's just how fast they're moving, right? And so, you rub your hands back and forth, friction, I'm moving things around, and I feel my hands warm up. That's just particle motion at the atomic scale. So faster temperature or higher temperatures equal faster particles. So things are colliding, they're moving around faster, bumping into one another. That creates higher temperature. It's that vibration at the atomic scale. But thermal energy is related to the total, not the average speed of the particles, but you sum up the total kinetic energy of all the particles in the substance. And the kinetic energy is related to how fast the particles are moving and how heavy the particles are. You think about throwing a ping pong ball, it's very easy to stop it, catch it. But if someone threw a bowling ball at you, it's much harder to catch. It'll throw you back. It's got a lot more mass and weight to it. There's this inertia to it, right? And so hot, heavy objects have much higher thermal energy. That's why a cast iron pan takes forever to cool down versus a nice thin and lightweight stainless steel pan. It's why immersion tanks hold their heat energy for so much longer, like a thermal battery, because that immersion fluid is very heavy and viscous and thick. And so it's got a lot of mass surrounding the miners, unlike air-cooled miners where the air around them is very lightweight. That's thermal energy. Now, I like to think about all this stuff through the 3 laws of thermodynamics. And there's 3 main laws, the first of which being the conservation of energy. And all that boils down to is that you can't create or destroy energy, can't delete it, can't generate it. You can only move it around and transform it between different forms. And so when electric energy goes through a Bitcoin miner, it's converted into heat energy. None of that is lost. You could get into the technicals and say it's 99.99999% efficient at converting electricity into heat. Maybe some of that energy goes to light or sound or vibration, but you don't want your hash boards glowing or moving around, right? So we just like to say it's 100% efficient. It's a very efficient transfer of energy. The second law of thermodynamics is that entropy always increases. This one's a little bit more difficult to explain if you're not familiar, but entropy is, there's a few ways to describe it. It's like a disorder or randomness in the universe. You can boil this all the way down to how if you don't take care of your belongings in your house, it gets more messy, or your car, it starts to deteriorate over time. That's entropy. It's following the second law of thermodynamics. Things get disordered and disorganized. I like to call it a directional nature to the universe. So the natural tendency of things is for them to get more disorderly, right? And you have to put in energy and work to fight that. We age, you have to put in energy and work and go to the gym to take care of your health and fight that deterioration of our body, things like that. And then the third law, the framing here, is just about the absolute zero temperature. So remember, we define temperature as the average velocity of these particles in a substance. And so what happens if the particles stop moving? If there's no motion, they're not moving, you have zero temperature. And that's defined on the Kelvin scale. It's a scale designed for this measurement, for this third law. So when there's no particle motion, the atoms aren't moving at all, you have zero temperature. That is 0 Kelvin or negative 459.67 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the deep space temperature in the void with no sunlight. Things aren't moving. We've been able in scientific experiments to get very close to absolute zero here on Earth in vacuum chambers and things like that. Never actually achieved in a man-made setting absolute zero. So here's a graphic just to explore the laws a little bit more closely. The first law here, you can see 3,000 watts of power is going into a Bitcoin miner, and we can safely assume that 3,000 watts of heat are coming out. It's negligible, the amount of energy that is transferred into other forms, like I said, motion or light or sound, right? Things like that. So that's that conservation of energy. We didn't lose it. If you have 3,000 watts of power coming into your machine, you have to manage 3,000 watts of heat. For the bigger guys, this is their challenge. They've got dry coolers, immersion tanks, VFD fans, all of this stuff, all this infrastructure designed to dissipate that heat. And the point here is you have to reject 3,000 watts of heat as fast as you're consuming it. If you were consuming 3,000 watts of power and only rejecting 2,095 watts of heat, you would slowly be increasing the temperature of that machine until it fries itself. So you have to reject it at the same rate, because otherwise it has nowhere else to go. Here's a graphic that helps us understand the second law of thermodynamics, this entropy generation. So these unmixed substances, let's just say you got like coffee and creamer in a glass, right? And when they're unmixed, you have low entropy. It's more orderly, it's more organized. The cream molecules are on top before you pour it in, and then the coffee molecules are on the bottom. But when you mix them and stir them, you create more entropy. Entropy increases. We're following that second law of thermodynamics. It's more disorganized, less orderly. And the point here, back to that directional nature of the universe, is that it would require an obscene amount of energy. Could you imagine trying to separate the cream from the coffee after you mix it? It's infeasible, right? And so that defines this directional nature. It can't be undone. You can undo some things when you put in the work, just like we go to the gym and we take care of our health and we undo some aging, we undo some deterioration in our body, but you can never perfectly do it. There's always efficiency loss, and that is what's defined by the second law of thermodynamics. As that relates to miners, that means that you can capture that 3,000 watts of heat. Back to the other slide on the right there, you could capture that 3,000 watts of heat, and you can turn some of it back into electricity, because remember, energy can't be created or destroyed, just transferred into different forms. So you could turn some of that heat, that 3,000 watts of heat power, back into electric power. But the second law dictates you'll never get the full 3,000 watts back, because entropy increases. Electricity is orderly. It's low entropy, excuse me. It's organized. You can use it for a lot of things. You can power your Bitcoin miner. You can charge your phone. You can drive your electric car. You can turn on the lights. But heat is not so much useful for that. It is more disorganized. So it requires some energy to get some of that back. And the second law dictates you'll never be able to get the full 3,000 watts back into electricity. And then here's a graphic for the third law. Remember, so the temperature is greater than 0 on the left. We have all these molecules bumping around and moving. The entropy is greater than 0. This is the third law relates to the second law. The point here about entropy is measured as disorderly or disorganized randomness, more states, more positions. You could see all those balls and say, oh, they could be here, they could be there, they could be in all these different spots. As you lower that temperature, that particle motion to absolute 0, they form a crystalline structure and they don't move. They're not vibrating at all at the atomic scale. So there's 0 temperature, but also at absolute 0, there's 0 entropy, because those balls there are rigid. They couldn't be in another state. They couldn't be moved around. There's no motion. The better way, I think, for Bitcoin miners to understand all these laws is the concept of quantity versus quality. So the quantity of energy or power, that 3,000 joules per second of electricity into heat, 3,000 watts, same thing. You can't get rid of that. So the total amount of energy in a system cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be moved or transformed. That's quantity. It's fixed. We're stuck with it. We got to manage the quantity. But the quality changes, and that's building off that comment I had on the second law. The usefulness of a given amount of energy is not conserved. Just because we move 3,000 watts of electricity into 3,000 watts of heat, its utility is not conserved. The amount is conserved, the quantity, but the utility is not. So high quality energy is organized. It has low entropy. That's something like electric power, right? It's stored in batteries, or it comes from the grid. It's high quality. It's running through our transmission lines. I got an iPad next to me and it's charging. It can be used for that. I also got speakers and headphones and a phone here. It can be used for all these things. It's high quality. Going one layer, down the line, down the chain, like hydrocarbon fuels could have higher quality than heat, for example. You can use them to power a generator. You can use them to start a fire and all of these things. Heat, however, is one of the lowest quality forms of energy. And what that means is it's very disorganized. It's literally molecules flying around, high temperature, and it's hard to use for work. It's disorganized and random. You can think about heat. It's just very fast motion. Things are moving around. And what I mean here when I say it's hard to use for work, that goes back to that point, is it's very hard to capture all of this energy, this thermal heat energy, and use it for organized things like charging your phone, right? How would you use heat to charge your iPhone? There's things like a Stirling engine out there, where you have a little flame, and that's used to create pressure that spins a wheel that creates kinetic motion. So right, you're turning that heat back into mechanical motion. But back to that second law, you can't do that with perfect efficiency. So electric power is high quality, heat is low quality, and it's hard to use for work. The last thing here is Exergy, which is the name of my business, and it actually has a term in thermodynamics. It has a definition, excuse me, in thermodynamics, and it's the portion of energy that can be converted back into useful work, force times distance. Remember, work is force times distance. It has a definition, as it equilibrates with the surroundings. What this really means is how much utility can you get out of miner heat exactly? And for the HeatPunks, this is important to us. The key differentiator here is I'm not talking about just using the heat for warmth. That's not work, right? If I just run a Bitcoin miner next to me at my desk here, and it's converting electric power into heat power, that heat is useful to me because I just want to get warmed up, but it's not performing work. The heat coming out of that machine is not doing force times distance. And so Exergy is the definition. It says, if we wanted to capture that heat, remember back to the graphics earlier, if we wanted to capture that heat and turn it back into electricity, Exergy is the definition and the equations that follow. How would you measure exactly how much of that 3,000 watts you could turn back into electricity? That's what Exergy is. And the part here about as it equilibrates with its surroundings, that has to do with the equation that defines Exergy, and heat can only flow from hot to cold. That follows that second law of thermodynamics. There's this directional nature to the universe. And so Exergy measures, okay, if my miner is exhausting 70 degrees Celsius fluid outlet temperature, pretty high, that's pretty useful. And it's 20 degrees Celsius in my room, around 70 degrees. That's the average room temperature to keep us comfortable. That temperature difference is 50 degrees Celsius. And the heat from the miner can drop from 70 to 20. It can't go below 20 because you can't get there. Heat doesn't transfer from cold to hot, only hot to cold. You can think about this like if you had, a hot cast iron pan, back to that example, and you leave it in the room, it will eventually diffuse that heat and dissipate, and it becomes room temperature. It doesn't get, your cast iron pan won't get colder than the room temperature. It doesn't have a cooling load on it. It equilibrates with the surroundings. And so Exergy measures, as you have heat energy, as you equilibrate with the surroundings, how much can you use that for useful work? And the last thing I'll say here is, what is this important for Bitcoin miners? Well, it's important for converting heat energy back into work, which is kind of the holy grail of Bitcoin mining heat reuse, I think. How would we turn heat from a Bitcoin miner back into force times distance, back into mechanical work? And the reason mechanical work is important is because mechanical work can be used to generate electricity, right? Like a generator, a steam turbine, things of that nature. You need to get 100 degrees Celsius outlet temperatures for this to work. It's very difficult with low grade heat, which is below the boiling point of most fluids, water being the main one there. And the reason for that is because steam gases, they are compressible. So they can be expanded and compressed, right? When you boil, water, but you have a closed lid on something, it starts to build up in pressure and that will explode, right? But water as a liquid state is incompressible. And so we need to convert the liquid into gas. And that's what the heat from Bitcoin miners would be required to do to generate mechanical work. How it works is you have a heat source from the Bitcoin miners. And if it can boil a fluid, it doesn't have to be water. That's why I said the target is 100 degrees Celsius. There are fluids out there that will boil at lower temperatures. There are special working fluids in thermodynamic processes. If we could boil a fluid and turn it into steam, a gas vapor, as it heats up, it will increase in pressure. What is that pressure? That pressure is a force. So if you apply that force from that pressure buildup over a distance, like in a steam turbine where the gas boils, it builds up in pressure, it spins turbine blades, that creates rotational motion, mechanical energy, which you could connect to an alternating current motor, a permanent magnet alternating current motor, and you're converting heat into pressure, which is force times distance over that steam turbine, creates mechanical motion, and that's connected to a generator that is turning mechanical motion back into electricity. That's how that process works. It's called an organic Rankine cycle. That's a heat-powered generator, essentially. And so Exergy, just back to wrap it up here, is how we measure how much we could do that. If Bitcoin miners were able to capture all their heat in the big field, but they got 10 megawatts or whatever in the middle of nowhere, and they were to capture that heat in liquid form, and it was hot enough to boil a working fluid, you created steam, you created pressure, you could turn some of that back into electricity. And what that means is you're effectively, like, say, here's the teaser. I mean, the efficiencies are pretty low because heat is so disorganized. It's like 10% max. Say you could get 10% of power. So that means you're exhausting 10 megawatts of heat. You're consuming 10 megawatts of electric power to run all the miners. You got 10 megawatts of heat coming out. You take that, you run it through an organic Rankine cycle. You're able to convert 1 megawatt, 10% of that, back into electricity. You essentially cut your power bill by 10%. And that's how that manifests, to use the HeatPunk manifesto. We're building off this. We're getting a little bit more in the weeds. But how could you use heat from Bitcoin miners to convert back into more useful forms of energy? That's what Exergy is all about. Yeah, diving here a little bit more on low-grade heat. So the miner outlet temperature are far below 100 degrees Celsius right now. It's considered ultra low-grade heat, and that really just means it's difficult to use for converting back into mechanical work. You can't boil water, you can't make steam. It's good for warmth, though. I have a chapter in my upcoming book that's just called Heat for Heating, because we value the heat. Good thing humans like to be comfortable. There's lots of cold places over the world. We have different seasons. It's winter right now where I'm at. It's 28 degrees out. I value the heat. I don't need necessarily to convert that heat energy back into a more useful form. It's not waste, though. That's the point. The heat to me is not waste. But furthermore, and I think we should strive for this as HeatPunks, is how can we, Bitcoiners are all about reducing waste, targeting efficiency improvements, and how to increase energy abundance, and really cracking this crown jewel of turning heat energy back into mechanical work and electricity and things like that will open up a wide plethora of more applications for Bitcoin miners. All right, that was all basically 2 college-level thermodynamics courses boiled down into 12 slides or whatever it was for Bitcoin miners. Now let's go into how Bitcoin miners move heat around. And this is all heat transfer 101. So there's 3 main ways to manage heat. After we know we have it, we can't get rid of it, right? So there's heat coming out of these machines from all the power they consumed. It's constantly coming out at that same rate. The quantity is conserved. We lost quality. It's no longer as useful as electric energy, but we still have heat energy. There's 3 ways to move heat around. This is important to us as HeatPunks because we want this heat in specific locations. Oh, I want my hot water tank heated up. Oh, I want the HVAC to be pulling this heat, things like that. But it's also pertinent to the mega miners that have to reject this heat at the same rate they're consuming it, or else their machines will fry. There's many horror stories in the mines, people learning the hard way of not properly managing heat, and it costs them thousands and thousands of dollars, big mistakes. So there's 3 main forms: conduction, convection, and radiation. And conduction is heat transfer through solid materials. Remember, temperature is just vibrations, atomic motion, kinetic motion. Things are moving at the atomic scale. When those molecules bump into one another, they transfer some of that speed, right? If I were to run and bump into Trevor here, he would fall over and he would start moving, right? And so they transfer their kinetic energy. And that's how conduction works. You're transferring energy by things touching, solid materials touching. Convection is heat transfer through fluids, and fluids are gases or liquids. So your immersion oil, but also your air-cooled miners, that's convection with heat sinks, right? And so that's when molecules in the fluid, in the gas or the liquid, do bump into the solid, and some of that kinetic motion is transferred from the solid to the liquid, or vice versa. That's convection. It's essentially conduction, but just you have one of the things is like a moving substance. And then there's radiation. This is heat transfer without any atomic collisions. It's through electromagnetic waves. And so everything, this is why that third law of thermodynamics was important. If you remember absolute zero, there's no particle motion at absolute zero. Anything above absolute zero, when you have particle motion, is radiating. So I'm radiating right now. Trevor's radiating right now. Every one of you watching online is radiating heat energy right now. It's because we're not at absolute zero. The molecules and atoms in our body are not frozen solid. We'd be dead. So everything radiates. Don't get spooked by all the terms here and equations, but here you can see conduction. So I tried to make a graphic here that represents the heat transferring from the ASIC chip. Let's just theorize as that term conduction there on the left. That is the ASIC chip on the hash board. That heat is transferring through the solids through direct contact with heat sinks. And so that heat spreads up the chips into all this metal material, all the heat sinks on top of the board. That's designed to do. So it facilitates conductive heat transfer. That's the equation in the top right there. And so the thing we're measuring, the dot on the top of the Q just means rate basis. It means time. So that means we know we're working in watts, not joules. The Q dot conduction, so it's the rate of heat transfer, conductive heat transfer, and it's equal to K, which is the thermal conductivity. That's how easily heat can transfer through a solid. You can think of it like what's insulating and what's not. You know, metal has a high thermal conductivity. It transfers heat very well. Have you ever grabbed like something metal and it feels cold to the touch? Like my water bottle here feels cold. It's empty. But the reason it feels cold, actually, this water bottle is room temperature. It has a high thermal conductivity, which means that it transfers heat really well. So it feels cold because it's actually pulling heat off of my body. I'm warmer than this water bottle. And so it feels cold to the touch, not because the water bottle is cold, but because it's high conductivity. It's pulling the heat out of my body because I'm a higher temperature. Ceramics, things like that, they have low conductivity. They provide an insulating effect. You could also look at the cross-sectional area. So more heat will transfer if you have more area. So if my hand was bigger and I was touching that water bottle, more heat would transfer from me to that water bottle. And then it's also driven by the temperature difference. If you remember what I said, heat transfer is dictated by the delta T, and it only flows from hot to cold. When you have a higher temperature difference, you transfer heat at a faster rate. So that just means that a Bitcoin miner that's exhausting 80 degrees Celsius outlet temperature will transfer heat. It could warm your room faster than a miner that's exhausting 70 degrees Celsius outlet temperature. Even though the room is 20 degrees Celsius, you're still going to warm it up, right? Because there is the delta T, but it will warm faster if you're using a higher outlet temperature. The delta T is larger. And then the last thing here is the term in the denominator. That's the length. It just means that the heat transfers more efficiently if there's less length for it to transfer through. And that's because it is all these atomic vibrations. If we had like 10 of us lined up and I pushed Trevor and Trevor pushed the guy behind him, that happens faster if the line is shorter. That's what happens at the atomic scale when molecules bump into one another. So how would you optimize conduction? Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you wanted to increase heat transfer, you would choose materials with higher conductivity. You would add more area, you would increase the temperature difference, or you would decrease the length, so thinner things. That's actually the point of heat sinks. Heat sinks have all these fins on them that increases the cross-sectional area. So that heat is pulled off the ASIC chip. And if you were to, take a heat sink and split it and lay out all the surface area on your desk, it would be much bigger footprint than the ASIC chip itself. That's the whole point. It increased surface area, which helps improve heat transfer, pulling heat away from that chip. Now let's look at convection. So here you can see a Bitcoin miner. Those are the heat sinks in there, and you have air flowing in from the left to the right. And what's happening here is that heat, the gas, that fluid, is passing over all that surface area on those heat sinks, and it's bumping into the surface, and that vibration at the atomic scale is transferring to the air, and it comes out the other side hotter than it came in. So again, Q dot convection here, rate-based. There's something called the convective heat transfer coefficient, which is more convoluted and a little bit harder to determine. There are tables and things like that, empirical data where you can look this up. But what it really boils down to, it's related to the turbulence. So that's just like how disorganized and disorderly the flow is, and also the velocity. So you can think if molecules of a gas are going all over the place versus if they're very orderly in a streamlined path. If they're disorganized and they're chaotic in their behavior and they're bumping into things and colliding at high speed, they will absorb more heat energy. They basically have a higher chance, higher probability of hitting the surface area. So that's how you increase the convective heat transfer coefficient. Also, the surface area here. So that's, again, the point of heat sinks. They increase the surface area by having all these fins, and that's how you get more heat off of those heat sinks into the gas. That's actually the point of a radiator too, or even a dry cooler. A dry cooler is just a radiator with fans on it, but the radiator in your car, all these little fins, the whole point of them is there's fluid moving through them in these tubes, and then that heat transfers to all these fins. And if you added up all the surface area of all these fins, it's a huge surface area. And so when the air passes over it, it's able to absorb more heat. And again, here, the temperature difference plays a role. So how would you optimize that? You would increase the heat transfer coefficient. You could make the fluid flow faster. You could you could facilitate turbulence by making it less orderly. You could increase the surface area, or you could increase the temperature difference. The last one here is radiation, and it's a little bit harder to conceptualize. Basically, what it boils down to is that radiation plays not a big role here on Earth, not for Bitcoin miners, and the reason for that is because we live on Earth where there's air all around us and we're touching things. I'm touching my desk right now. I'm sitting in a chair. We have this physical nature around us. And so it's often trumped by the fluid and solid convective and conductive heat transfer. That's not to say it doesn't play a role. The equations are a little bit more complex. Where radiation really is very important is in the deep space. When you're not touching anything, so there's nothing around you, if you were just floating in space, if a Bitcoin miner was running in space, it's not touching anything, so it can't transfer that heat to the table that it's sitting on, or the rack, or the chassis, and there's no air in space. So how would you get rid of that heat? It would have to be rejected through radiation. There's a handful of terms here. It relates to what you're looking at with radiation. Because these are electromagnetic waves, you can think of it like ray tracing, right? So like shooting lines. If I can see my laptop here, I'm radiating to my laptop. I can also, it's called a view factor. I can also see my water bottle to my left. So I am also radiating some amount to that water bottle. If things can't see one another, that radiation is inhibited. Emissivity is how well, that's the E there. That's how well something emits radiation. Black paint has high emissivity. So this black water bottle will emit heat radially faster than this stainless steel one. Absorptivity is how good a material it is at absorbing radiative heat energy. Reflectivity, rho there, is how good a material or surface is at reflecting. So if a ray came and hit me, the sunshine, and it reflected, that's what white paint is good for. White paint has high reflectivity. That's why we paint things white when the sun is baking down on them, that radiative heat transfer. It reflects most of that. So white things sitting out in the sun, just like a hot car, a black car is very hot to the touch, a white car is not. That's reflectivity. And transmissivity is how well a material is at transmitting the radiation through it. So it actually doesn't heat up, it just passes it on through it. So for heat rejection, Q dot radiation rejection, there's a handful of variables here. I won't get too into the weeds. Some empirically derived constant called the Stefan-Boltzmann constant. The surface area is important. The emissivity, right? Because we're thinking about how would a material radiate energy. And as it relates to a Bitcoin miner here, if you had a really hot power supply, for example, we know power supplies are often the failure point for many machines as they heat up. Well, how could you improve them, right? You could, paint the things, the circuit boards or the boxes or all these chips with a high emissivity coating, or design them that way. So they would actually radiate their energy away in addition to the convection and conduction that's going on. And then the temperature difference. The temperature difference always applies to heat transfer, because remember, heat can only transfer from hot to cold. What about heat absorption? What if I wanted to warm something up? This is using the absorption term, the absorptivity, and you want a higher absorptivity. So you would increase radiative absorption, heat energy absorption, with a higher absorptivity. Black paint also has a high absorptivity. The term we use in heat transfer world is A over E. So that ratio, how good is a surface finish, a paint, for example, or a wood or metal or aluminum or plastic, how good is it at absorbing divided by how good is it at emitting? And that ratio defines basically what that steady state temperature will be. you can tweak these, and Bitcoin miners that are in really sunny areas, maybe you've got a container that's in sunny Colorado, it's very sunny here 300 days out of the year. You would design that potentially with an optimal A/E ratio to make sure that the box isn't heating up from baking in the sun. Because remember, if that heat transfers to the roof of that container, that heat has to go somewhere. Some of it will radiate down onto your miners and just add extra heat to the system. So you can optimize this stuff. And then finally here, this is the most complex equation. It's the radiative heat transfer between objects. If I had my 2 water bottles here, how would I calculate the heat transfer between the two? And that has to do with that view factor. So absorptivity and emissivity are included here in this equation. How good is the material, the first material? Remember, heat will only transfer from hot to cold. So that's how this equation is lined up. You're looking at from 1 to 2, assuming the material 1 is hotter than 2. And so what's the emissivity of a material 1 and what's the absorptivity of material 1? And then the view factor is how well it sees this. And how we calculate this, it's very hard to do by hand, napkin math. It's very similar to actually how ray tracing works in NVIDIA graphics cards for video gamers. The equations and the software that calculates this, it literally shoots out millions of rays, of lines, vectors. And it says, oh, did that one hit that piece and come back? Did that one hit that piece and come back? Did that one hit that piece and come back? And you can approximate a view factor, how much one water bottle sees the other water bottle, how much one chip sees the other, how much one Bitcoin miner sees the hot roof of that container baking in the sun. And that's how you would determine the radiative heat transfer between objects, which is useful to know. And so optimizing radiation boils down to you could increase or decrease the hot component surface area, depending on what you're trying to do. You could choose materials with higher or lower emissivity, again, depending on what you're trying to do. You could increase or decrease the temperature difference if you want to facilitate more radiative heat transfer or inhibit it. I think in Bitcoin mines, we'd want to inhibit it. We want to manage. If you got to reject the heat, you want to manage as little as possible. You don't want to deal with it. So you want to reject that heat coming in from baking in the sun. For the HeatPunks that have Bitcoin miners in their apartments and whatnot, in their homes and businesses, you're not baking in the sun. So that's back to my earlier point that radiative heat transfer plays a small role compared to convection and conduction. And then you can also increase the view factor. You can just help the objects see one another better. If I have, a cold wall that is acting as a good thermal sink because it's cold and radiation will transfer to it, I want my hot stuff to be able to see that cold wall very well, and that will improve radiative heat transfer. And so this is my last slide here. I went through it pretty quick, but we're still on time. So the takeaway for Bitcoin miners is, back to thermodynamics and energy, is you need to respect and understand energy. There are physical laws that define how we can manage energy, how it transfers to different forms, how useful it is. It's important for us HeatPunks to understand that, as well as the mega miners that have to reject that heat as fast as they're consuming it, consuming power. And then the heat must be managed. And these equations exist. They've been around for a while. It's very, it can seem overwhelming, but it can be understood. You can boil this down to some napkin math. You can often disregard radiation. You can run the analysis on convection and conduction. And tools out there exist to help you understand how can I better manage the heat in this facility or in heat reuse scenario. So that's my presentation. Thank you all for joining. And Trevor, do you want to hop back in here?
Yeah, man. Wow. I just got to say that is a lot of information. And for anybody who wants to go back and understand it a little bit better, we will have recordings on our YouTube channel because a lot of that is just, the technical side of it, but it's important to understand when you're building out heating infrastructure. Yeah, just thank you so much, Tyler. Really appreciate you coming on and kind of explaining that. That was a much more in-depth version of your HeatPunks manifesto that you presented in Brainerd.
Yeah, well, that video exists, so I wanted to do something a little more technical. Maybe not for everyone, but if you are curious or want to learn more or even see how these equations play out as it relates to Bitcoin mining, they are in the appendix of my upcoming book.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that book. All right, guys. So I've got a couple things to talk about real quick, but take your if you've got questions for Tyler, put them in the chat right now. We're going to take a couple minutes before we close up to answer any and all questions that you guys have. So make sure that those get in the chat. If they're not in the chat, they will not get answered. Real quick before we start answering some questions that come in, I want to tell you guys about this happy hour summit that we have, or happy hour going on at the NAPE Summit. So this is put on by NAPE, or by Bitcoin Mining World and the Texas Blockchain Council. So it's Thursday, February 6th at 6 p.m. It's going to be at the Pitch 25. You can see the address there. RSV with the QR code to secure your spot today. It's going to be a good time. We're going to have some drinks. We're going to have some food. It's gonna be a good time, a good event for Bitcoiners to go and, you know, talk about Bitcoin, talk about some heat reuse if you want to. It's gonna be great. And the next thing that I want to tell you guys about is, we mentioned this a little bit in the last deep dive, but we have a QR code here that you can scan that takes you to a giveaway that we're going to be doing on the next Mastermind deep dive. So on February 14th, we're doing a giveaway for the cryo block. Now, the cryo block is for S19 miners right now. At least this model is. So if you don't have an S19, I mean, I guess you could still enter to win, but it wouldn't really do you any good. You wouldn't be able to use this for, you know, a mining operation that you have. But this goes hand in hand with what Tyler has been talking about and the heat reuse side of Bitcoin mining. So this is a great opportunity to, you know, tinker, learn, play. It's going to be a great time. So I'm actually really looking forward to getting my cryo block in the mail, you know, in the next month or so. So it's gonna be awesome. And when I do get that, I will be sharing some of my stuff on a new podcast that I'm doing. I'm not going to talk about that too much now, but yeah, it's gonna be good. Tyler, again, thank you, man. Like I really, you know, a lot of that information was just high level, in the weeds, technical jargon, but how does that relate to us when we're, you know, in our basements, in our garages, tinkering with these Bitcoin miners and trying to, you know, heat water or heat up, you know, maybe even cook food? I saw Carl posted in one of the chats today that he actually, whatever that process of cooking food in water in like a bag is, he used that to create, like, to cook a roast, you know? So how does this relate to what we're doing in the HeatPunk scene?
I think for this audience and a lot of the people who are tinkerers and builders, right? It's not so much the normies. You guys are already, you know, played around with the Bitcoin miner. You know how they work. You've taken one apart. You're curious how you could run it in your house. Oh, does it make sense? I mean, it basically boils down to as simple as, do I need 10 machines or 5 machines to heat up my house? Do I need one? Like, my point is, all this framing I think is useful, and the equations can be simplified. It's actually not too hard to go in and say, I have a hot water tank that's 50 or 100 gallons. It stays steady at whatever temperature. I know the miners are exhausting this temperature. I know my flow rate is this. And you can actually work back with just a handful of equations and some ChatGPT, to be honest, to go and calculate, oh, I really only need one miner and it needs to be running at 2,500 watts to hit that target and things like that. So I think it's helpful for the people out there that are curious and passionate about innovating and building, but whether designing prototypes or integrating these systems for other clients, it's helpful to understand. And then the other point is just having all that framing in mind, I think, is super helpful when you're out in the field. For the people who aren't so much the HeatPunks, but maybe I would love the HeatPunk movement to expand to the larger mining operations to, you know, reduce waste and be more cognizant of our energy consumption. We're doing more with it. If you're walking into your mine and you see this heat energy and you can feel it, like the one we toured in Minnesota, right? It makes you wonder, it makes you think, like, oh, I actually know, like, the framing fundamentals of this. I know that it can be used for this, it can't be used for that. It's pretty useful to have that framing, I think, going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my initial thoughts are, you know, I've had a couple of people reach out to me, some people in the mastermind community as well, asking, you know, how many miners do I need to heat my pool, and you know, what do those numbers look like? And I think there's a lot of different factors at play, but having these equations and having this framework helps you determine, okay, well, like you said, do I need 2 miners? Do I need 6 miners? What kind of cooling solution am I using to transfer that heat? So I think it's super important to have that framework and frame of mind when you're building out these systems.
Yeah. And I just say too, like, what's helped me is not getting caught up in what I call analysis paralysis. Like, when I was running, if I'm running napkin math for someone's house or their pool, for example, I'm just automatically going to disregard radiation. It's not like a high performance, high precision scenario where that, you know, those couple extra 100 watts of radiation or whatever it is going to be the determining factor of if it works or not. We're still in the same, like, order of magnitude. if you have a pool, you probably want to calculate the surface area of that pool. So how much of that pool is exposed to the air above you, your climate. And then if it's negative 10 degrees out, when you want to heat the pool, the surface area and the delta T from your target pool temperature and the pool. So you can use the convection coefficient in that equation to determine, what does this rough math look like? How many watts am I going to be leaking to the environment? How many watts will my pool just be convecting? And so if you wanted to keep a pool 25 degrees Celsius, you have to overcome that rate of convective escaping the top from that top of the pool. And so those kind of numbers, it's really just those equations I showed on screen. They can be done just on a napkin with a piece of paper in simple analysis.
Awesome. Math is fun, guys, when you put it in the right place. All right. So we got a couple of questions coming in. Again, put your questions into the chat and I will make sure they get answered. So we've got a couple questions from Chad Mercer and they build off of each other. So we'll start with the first one. So Chad asks, what implementations have you worked with? For example, single board heaters, hot tubs, HVAC systems, etc.
Totally. Good question. So my hands-on experience is basically limited to retrofitting an old S9 into that CryptoCloaks space heater build project that he put the documentation out with that PDF. Really good project. That was how I dove into this myself to tinker. That still had all the hash boards. That's obviously an older miner, so we can run off 120 volt household residential outlet here in the United States. That was an eye-opening experience for me. Not to get too sucked into the weeds, but that showcased to me how unapproachable it is to, I think, a newcomer or even like a tradesman if he was offering this service. I've obviously seen the hot tubs and pools. I've been blessed to visit Bob, Home Bitcoin Immersion Mining, Bob's home. His whole house is heated by Bitcoin miners. He's got a dry cooler to reject some of that heat even when he doesn't need it. He's got solar panels, an amazing design. Unfortunately, I tell people this, I joke, I'm all about HeatPunks and heat reuse with Hashrate, right? My apartment here has free heat, so I have no incentive to do it. And I have expensive electricity, which is a little bit of a bummer. Hopefully when I move, I can start to tinker with some more projects. And then on the larger scale, I've done a few audits and assessments for example, a greenhouse up at high altitude here in Colorado, 10,000 foot greenhouse. They're spending $5,000 a month on propane to keep it warm. It's high altitude. They pretty much need that heat most of the year. It's high duty cycle. They have 3-phase power. It's all just about working with that power utility contract. Because they're an industrial user, to say, wait a second, could Bitcoin miners use this system and lower their costs? And they already are very familiar with hydronics. They use 2 propane-fed boilers. So a little bit of experience with, determining what would that system look like to just replace those propane boilers with an immersion tank or a hydro rack or things like that.
Absolutely, for sure. I mean, having the experience, it's different for everybody. It kind of varies depending on, where you are in the incentives that you have. And obviously you don't have the same incentives, but you are at the forefront of this space and you're watching so many people do it. For those that are curious, I just had a conversation on my podcast that will be out in a couple of weeks with, Schnitzel. Schnitzel is the one who built the portable hash tub. So
Yeah.
it's a little hot tub. It's heated by Bitcoin miners. He built the entire system. And if you go to nakamotoheatingsolutions.com, you can actually see his entire build up, all the parts list, like the write up. It's incredible. But we went over that in the podcast. So just a little bit of a touch there. And then so Chad is saying also, based on the equations, are the basic tables that show BTU requirements for a given square footage of homes at a certain ambient temperature?
The short answer is yes. I don't know them off the top of my head. Who is really good about this, and it might be a little bit more pertinent to the local climate he lives in, is Cade of Softform. So he has really good rough cuff, top of the head numbers where it's like your home is this many square feet, you need X number of BTUs, or however many BTUs you consume. Like you could look at a furnace, you could just roughly estimate how many miners you need. I need to get better about that. My engineer brain likes to think through everything from the base units, the joule and kilowatt hour. And so I need to get a little bit more familiar with the BTU stuff, because I know that's how everything's rated. And the last thing I just say to Chad there, what's interesting, if you guys are curious about this, you go into your utility closet, look at your furnace or your boiler. Something that's interesting with Bitcoin mining heat reuse is that your furnace will say that it's rated for 150,000 BTUs. That doesn't mean you need 150,000 or BTUs per hour, right? Because that's equivalent to watts power unit. That doesn't mean you need 150,000 BTU hour of miners. And the reason is duty cycle. Your furnace will kick on for 5 minutes until the temperature in your house hits 70 degrees, and then it'll shut off for 55 minutes. And then it's on for 5 minutes of the 60 minutes. That's a low duty cycle. And so that rating on the furnace means how much heat it can deliver if it was running full time. And the unique thing about Bitcoin miners, because they're digital, they're computers, you can control them. They don't need to run for 5 minutes and then shut off. They can dynamically adjust their power. And so actually you need much less BTU rating or kilowatt rating of the machines. So you can't go in there and say, oh, the furnace says I need 10 miners just from that little math. You have to look at the duty cycle. You need to determine, and that's why Chad's question is very important, how much BTUs are you actually using in the house, which is a little bit more convoluted to determine. Obviously, there's rough estimates out there, like based on square footage and climate. How I like to do it is with something called heating degree day method. And that looks at the average temperature over the past 20 years in your location. And it basically says how many hours of the day, on average, over the past 20 plus years, was the temperature below 65 degrees. That's like the base target for comfort. I don't know why it's not 70, but how many hours of the day over every month of the year on average over the past 20 years, was it below 65 degrees? That basically dictates how many hours of the year you need heat. And from that, you can kind of back calculate how much heating target you're going to need. And you can look at how much heat you use based on your energy bills. Maybe you already have electric, maybe you look at your propane consumption or your natural gas. And you can relate how much energy you use each month to the average amount of hours below the heating temperature target of 65 degrees. And that gives you a ratio. And it helps you determine, if it's X degrees outside, this is how much heat I need. And the last step there is you say, okay, let's design the system for the design condition. I want it to work on the coldest day. So you pick the coldest, most extreme day. You use that ratio. You know how much energy and heat you use based on how cold it is from the heating degree day method. And you can say, okay, did the math. I need 3 miners with confidence. And that will cover me for 99% of days. Things like that. That's my favorite tool to use. You could obviously do thermal analysis. That's that analysis paralysis. You could get really into the weeds. You could do all the way just a rough estimate BTUs per square footage. I like to do something in the middle where I am kind of more cognizant of the climate and the location you live in and historical weather patterns.
Yeah, definitely. I would say to anybody who is, slightly confused about this, we'll have Tyler's Telegram we'll get Tyler in the Mastermind Club. And then you can ask any questions to him, especially if you have a heating solution or a project that you're trying to start. Tyler's really good about breaking this down for you and giving you the numbers as well. So our next question comes from Daniel. Tyler, do you think the priority to target audience for home heating are BTC fanatics or the marginal pleb that would be happy to offset their heating bills?
I think the innovation is happening with the Bitcoin fanatics. We're already seeing that. Guys like Trevor, who have a Loki rig behind him, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. But what I try to point out in my upcoming book is the target market is much larger than people realize. And Trevor and I did a podcast about this on the Build a Mind podcast a little bit ago. Just for context, the total energy used for heat annually is 250 times larger than the entire Bitcoin mining energy network consumption. So 175 terawatt hours used annually for Bitcoin. It's over 42,000 for heat. Caveat, that is not to say that's all electric heat. That could be natural gas, propane, even considering wood and heating oil in rural communities, right? But some fraction of that is already electric. That, I think, is the next phase. Let's target those people because the bill's the same. They're already paying for electric heat. You might as well just get Bitcoin for it. There's no change in their bill. The next phase above that would be people where it actually can save them money, but it's a little bit more convoluted to determine. That's where like a little bit of a heat audit economic analysis is helpful. For me and the people near me up in the mountains in Colorado, that's propane and wood. There are entire neighborhoods up in Colorado in the foothills and up at high altitude that don't have natural gas lines drilled through the granite. And so they have propane trucks. Every single house has a propane tank in front of it. And when you convert that propane to a cost per kilowatt hour equivalent, it's around the same as electricity. Why would I pay the same price for propane, have to shovel my driveway, have to pay a delivery fee, have all this, these headaches, have these swings in my temperature because it's a bang, bang on off system with a duty cycle, when I could just plug in miners for the same heating cost and one pays me Bitcoin. So to finalize Daniel's question, I think it'd be awesome if we could next focus on what are the things we need to do from a firmware, form factor, ease of use perspective, that these machines are not so much designed as industrial Bitcoin miners meant for the Riots and the Clean Sparks and the Maras to go in these industrial settings, but they're more designed to be an off-the-shelf furnace or a water heater you see at Ace Hardware or Home Depot. And that's, I think, where we need to target. It's difficult. I think it'll take some time because like you can't explain hash price to a novice. So maybe some unique business models will arise where they don't even mention Bitcoin. I've seen people coin it digital boilers and things like that. Proof of concepts, I think, will get us there, though. You know, if I get one person in this neighborhood up in, you know, Boulder, Colorado to save 80% on their propane bill, and then they tell their neighbor at a dinner party, and the next thing you know, an HVAC company that services that community can offer this, and they're confident in it, and they know how it works. Boom, you just spread into that whole community, and then it scales from there.
Yeah, you know, it's you mentioned Cade Peterson. Cade is doing some incredible things, you know, turning a car wash into a Bitcoin mining car wash, turning, you know, a concrete mixing plant into a Bitcoin mining concrete plant. There are use cases out there that we're not even thinking of. I mean, Ryan mentioned it the last deep dive that we had, but I think it was his grandfather dries grain, you know, in a mill before it, or in a silo before it goes to the mill, and he's using Bitcoin miners to do that. So there's so many use cases that we haven't even thought of, and it's just going to take time for these things to be built out. And you know, one thing that I'm noticing is that we're starting, the HeatPunks movement and the Hashrate heating industry is starting to get noticed by the big guys. I mean, it's a small step, but Kanan just released a, you know, in-home floor baseboard heater. I know this is not like a huge step, but it's a small step in the direction of.
No, I think it's a huge step.
I think it's a huge step, but it's you know, once we have the large industrial manufacturers competing for our business and not just the large scale mining operators business, we'll see a lot of these changes, you know. And I think another big step is going to be when we start seeing reeled chips that we can start implementing into our own sized boards and our own sized mines or mining.
100%. Some simple challenges to think about, like the chips are the biggest one. It doesn't make sense to buy an S19 and tear it apart to change the form factor to fit more easily in your system for your HVAC duct or whatever it is. But if we had chips, we could design a hash board. You could design a furnace with like slidable, upgradable heating elements that are really just hash boards that are designed to slot into this whatever form factor furnace. And every 5-10 years or whatever, as they get cheaper, it's older chips, we're not so sensitive to bleeding edge efficiency. You can just swap out that heating element and upgrade it. Much like heating elements are already upgraded in HVAC systems today, where they have 30-year life cycles. So I definitely think we'll get there. I think it's amazing what Kanan is doing with, you know, they have access to the chip fab. They make industrial miners, so they are well suited to just say, wait a second, we can just put these chips in this other shape. It looks like a baseboard heater. It plugs into 120 volts. Boom, done. It has an app. It's easy to set up. I think we're going to see much more of that. My theory is at the Bitcoin conference in Vegas this year, there's going to be over a dozen heating products. I counted half a dozen last year where I met Trevor. I think it's just going to continue to grow. And just to finish my thought back to Daniel's comment, because I want anyone listening that hasn't heard this crazy stat, Trevor knows it. If 1%, based on those numbers, of heating infrastructure was converted to hash rate, if 1%, and I'm pretty sure more than 1% of heating infrastructure is already electric, it would add approximately 2 zettahash to the network. So when the mega miners are saying, oh, what's the road to the next zettahash? It's you got to move heaven and earth to get the next gigawatt plant online. You need a new substation, blah, 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 blah. We need nuclear. I'm sitting here on the sidelines saying, this energy already exists and it's already being used. We don't need any more energy. It's pretty easy. We just need the chips and the firmware guys and us to put our heads together to make these products more scalable. And then boom, you're going to increase the security of the network by 3x.
Yeah, man. I think that is the perfect place to end this off. Tyler, I just want to say thank you so much for coming out and speaking to our community. Guys, again, here's the QR code to sign up for the Bitcoin, the MasterMINED Club. And here is the QR code to jump on the next deep dive that we have. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out. We appreciate your audience, your viewership, and we, help us grow this community. Share this with your friends. Tell people to sign up. Education is key. Knowledge is power. All right. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for joining us in the Mastermind Club, your ultimate gateway into the world of Bitcoin mining. Whether you're just starting out or looking to scale your operations, our vibrant community of like-minded enthusiasts is here to support you every step of the way. Join us next week where you'll exchange ideas, brainstorm strategies, and stay motivated on your mining journey. Thank you for joining us, and tune in next week.
Awesome. Well,